Nicole Shanahan, the former running mate of RFK Jr., recently caused major controversy on X when she went viral for this post about chemtrails. Watch.
I was taking the weekend off the internet. I've been surfing this morning and was watching the planes flying overhead, and then I couldn't take it anymore. But that is not a contrail. That looked like it started as a contrail maybe, and now it's turning into a cloud. See how thick that is? You can see this one, it's a little further behind, and this one's a little bit further behind as well. This one is the one that's been up there longest. This shit has to end. This is ridiculous. It's like an otherwise perfect day.
Well, I had a chance to sit down with her recently to ask her about what the government can do about chemtrails, what we know about it versus what the media tries to pretend we don't know, and other MAHA priorities such as fluoride, chemicals in our food, and also why is HHS focused on anti-Semitism? It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you do too. Watch. Nicole Shanahan, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for offering your time. I want to start by asking you about chemtrails because you lit the internet on fire when you started to talk about this, and many mainstream media outlets are just declaring out of pocket, that's a conspiracy theory, nothing to see here. Well, we've seen that before with, the JFK investigation, COVID, vaccines, things like that. So what do you think? Let's talk about the media later, but let's start with, what do you think Health and Human Services can actually do about this? What are the answers that we're seeking?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It appears that the Overton window has been blown wide open on the issue of geoengineering, atmospheric weather modification. And, the term chemtrails comes fairly loaded because there's an assumption when you use the term chemtrails that there's something harmful happening as a result. And that's why it's become the colloquial go-to term. And in fact, those who have been watching this and have dedicated their lives to tracking geoengineering, they are comfortable using the term chemtrail now because they have identified particles, materials, inputs that are being used for geoengineering and weather modification through aerosol injection that actually are harmful to human health and our ecosystem health as well. So natural systems such as soil, water, and air are being impacted negatively. And I do know that HHS is in the process of putting together a team to investigate this. Much is unknown. Some is known. We do know that cloud seeding does exist. We do know that counties throughout the United States have active contracts with private companies to cloud seed and thus bring greater moisture to arid lands. And this is all done under the umbrella of climate change mitigation. And so what we don't know and what HHS wants to figure out is the full spectrum of these activities and whether there is a fundamental missing regulatory body looking into harmful impacts of these practices.
What strikes me as, I was just reading my local city council newsletter, and they're trying to get feedback on a new overpass. And so they have to get public consent for a park and an overpass. Why no public consent for modifying the weather, even if they have benevolent intentions?
Yeah, so there's a few layers to this. So there's the state regulatory layer, and then there's the federal, and then there's this whole category of federal airspace projects that are protected as confidential. And I think that's where we need to be spending efforts at the executive level, is really investigating what the federal government is doing without these disclosures. So, at the state level, so there's this misconception that if you ban geoengineering at the state level, you protect all the skies above that state from these practices. That's false. Even if you ban geoengineering at the state level, such as what Tennessee has done, the federal government can still operate these projects overhead. There is no referendum process or even required disclosure process, and that is wrong. That is not okay. And while this hasn't been fully or thoroughly examined legally, there's no lawsuits yet, but there should be. So states that have banned these practices have every right to sue the federal government for these practices. We just haven't had a state level attorney general yet bring one of these cases forward. And if you are an AG of one of these states, I highly recommend that we push for one of these lawsuits, because I don't know how else we're going to get these disclosures.
Oh, that's fascinating. What a fascinating idea. Now, the media line, again, is geoengineering is real, but chemtrails are not. That defies logic. They say out of pocket, we know that there's no harmful effects, when we knew from Operation Popeye in Vietnam that it was lead iodide. How do we know? We lack the information. So what is your take on the utter lack of curiosity of the corporate media and their out of turn announcement that this is fine, nothing to see here?
I think it reminds all of us of the statement around the mRNA vaccines being safe and effective. Don't look under the hood. Don't listen to these conspiratorial voices. And in fact, there is quite a bit of active censorship or media manipulation that really deters individuals from furthering their inquiries and curiosity as to what's actually at play. And, I think that playbook of really using these derogatory attacks on qualified inquiries to shut them up. I mean, that reminds us all of what it felt like during those COVID lockdowns. And so there's a lot of parallels to be drawn between the COVID-19 era and what's happening today, which is this Overton window being blown wide open on the issue of geoengineering, people coming forward with evidence that is raising concern, real red flags about the contents of what is being used for weather modification, the lack of regulatory oversight, the lack of disclosure to the public, the lack of public consent. And here we are. Here we are at what I think is the beginning of this global conversation around geoengineering and fact finding, and going up against, we don't really know what right now. Is this, I do know the Gates Foundation is involved in geoengineering. I do know Open Philanthropy is involved in geoengineering. I know that the World Economic Forum has pushed it, and several universities are pushing for it. And sure, that's fine. But we also deserve, as the people, a full disclosure process and referendum opportunity to opine.
Right. And so they call us all crazy for coming up with theories because we get no real data. I'm sure, have you seen the old clip of Prince even talking about how kids fight more when they play outside because of chemtrails, like years ago, right? And so these are valid questions. Now, NOAA, the National or Oceanic Association, is saying, well, we just don't have that technology. And, if you're really taking it so far as redirecting hurricanes and things like that, then you really have just gone too crazy. My problem with that is I've seen NOAA capable of some really unacceptable politics in the last several years, for instance, refusing to acknowledge that wind farms kill whales, their sort of take on the oceanic warming when they know that natural cycles warm the ocean. So I get nervous when I see a government agency ringing in about this, even though we have a new administration. So can we trust NOAA, or do you think we're better off under HHS because you have this personal faith in RFK Jr.?
So interestingly, there is a disclosure requirement if a geoengineering company is going to be modifying the weather, they're actually required by law to notify NOAA of that so that NOAA can update its weather forecasts. So the fact that they're saying such, contradictory things like, well, don't, there's things that can be done, but you guys are adding too much hyperbole to this, too much sensationalism. Like, you don't, waste your time discussing the sensationalism of weather modification. Go on with your day. There's nothing to be concerned with here.
Right.
Well, they don't actually have enough knowledge to understand the totality of what these projects do to our ecosystem and atmospheric processes. And, for them to just brush this off as no big deal, when in fact we know that, the laws of thermodynamics and the unpredictability of our atmosphere can lead to serious consequences. And there have been scientists that have been blowing the whistle on this, raising concerns about the fact that when you meddle with atmospheric systems, there are unintended consequences that we don't fully understand how to model yet and predict. And given the fact that not all of these are disclosed and looked at under, one system model is problematic as well. So I think, in total, NOAA really ought to be empowering dissenting voices. And again, this is what happened during COVID-19. We censored dissenting voices that were qualified, including the voice of Jay Bhattacharya, who is now head of NIH, an epidemiologist from Stanford University, who was silenced because he looked at the data and said, lockdowns are not being handled properly. There's a better way to do this. And he was, silenced. And so there's many people today in the context of geoengineering and weather modification that are also being silenced. These are very important voices, and NOAA ought to be listening to them. I do know that HHS will be listening to them.
Okay. But that's one government agency. So we could possibly have dueling government agencies with dueling agendas, which, it's bad for all of us when we have no consent inside an administration. One thing I wanted to ask you, if we pivot away a little bit from chemtrails, is the wish list of Maha moms, because I think the both of us are in that group definitively. And one of the things that RFK Jr. had promised that on day one of the Trump administration that fluoride would be ordered to be removed. And we have not seen much inklings, many conversations about that yet since Secretary Kennedy has taken office. What do you think in terms, where do you think that lies? This is just, I'm asking because it gives me a lot of anxiety. It's one of my top wish lists. And so maybe I'm asking for selfish reasons. But among the things that we obviously want is vaccine safety, preservatives and chemicals that are harmful removed from the food chain, and fluoride. Do you think that these are just in a wish list that we'll get to? What's your take on that?
It is. I am learning. I'm not within the administration, but I am very close to it. And, I view my role as reporting on it and trying to, understand really what the hurdles are, where the hurdles lie. I mean, for instance, the CDC is refusing to give access to HHS to very important databases. And those databases do contain information about, for instance, what are in some of these lot numbers that were injected into American citizens, because we know that there was inconsistency in the vaccine manufacturing process of the mRNA vaccines. And, we would like to know which lot numbers were compromised. So this is something that I feel like the public deserves access to. This is really important information for individuals to be able to investigate what is going on with their own health. And there's roadblocks. And so there's these various layers of bureaucracy that prevent these very common sense agenda items to get through. And, fluoride, a very important study just came out that showed conclusively that a certain amount of exposure to fluoride in the water causes neurodevelopmental issues, decreased IQ. And it's a very good study. It's a solid study, but why can't that study affect immediate change? Also, why can't the studies on the problems with the mRNA vaccine affect enough change for the FDA to withdraw its approval? Well, there's a lot of legacy roadblocks in the federal government right now within these agencies. And it is going to take a massive effort to unlock those roadblocks. There's individuals within these agencies that are actively trying to undermine these efforts. And it's, this is a
Who
big
are they?
challenge.
Can I curse them? What do I need to do? like what do us moms need to do, right? Because this is, again, something that's very important to us, is removing any kind of toxins from the lives of our babies. Like what needs to happen. And I guess, when the Trump administration took office, there were a lot of us like, all right, we're doing this now. These were the promises. And I'm an adult. I realize that when you get a new job, it's not the way you dreamed it would be, and that there are roadblocks in place. But I really appreciate your take on what those roadblocks are. And do you think that there is, maybe can you give me I don't want to get you in trouble, but I want to ask this in a nice way. What are the conflicting interests that would keep those things from happening? Who are they besides the Gates Foundation and things like that?
Well, fluoride's an interesting one because you have like the American Dental Association claiming that fluoride prevents cavities, and they present data that, I think I'm going to misquote this stat, but the fluoride in the water is presenting over 20% of cavities from occurring. And tooth decay is a real problem. It costs the government, or it costs the country, billions of dollars. And it's saving families money. But when you line it up to the, cost, the cost benefit analysis of lower IQs and potential neurological damage, it doesn't make sense. So there's this common sense issue within our nation, generally speaking, where there are groups that want to keep the fluoride in the water. And actively trying to fight the MAHA agenda, calling them. Remember, fluoride 20 years ago was being called out as an issue in the water, and those individuals were framed as conspiracy theorists. If you remember the movie with Mel Gibson, conspiracy theory, I think it was actually called Conspiracy Theorists. Fluoride is a theme in this film, and so this has been a multi-decade battle, and here we are now on the front lines, close to getting it done, and we still hear these same embedded interests, and it doesn't really make sense, I mean, to anybody besides, it truly does the dental industry, are they all fighting for this? I mean, certainly my dentist isn't fighting to keep fluoride in the water. No, there's other ways to get it. So it just doesn't make sense where this policy and where this battle is coming from to keep it in the water.
Right. And how much of it is just ego because the government fought against this science for so long. A great book on this is The Fluoride Deception by Christopher Bryson. And they talk about how many scientists knew this and the connection of the Manhattan Project is fascinating. How many lives were ruined just for bringing this inconvenient data into the American Dental Association. So that's just one of many. And then what is your sense about the food industry? Is there a fight back for the chemicals and the dyes that we know are harmful for our children? Does Secretary Kennedy and HHS, do you think, and I know I'm not asking you to speak as an insider, I just want to make that clear. Do you think that they are also in an uphill battle in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that glyphosate is our biggest enemy when it comes to food. Glyphosate, much like fluoride, is proven to cause, and tons of evidence, billions of dollars Bayer and Monsanto have had to pay out in glyphosate damages because it is connected to a very specific form of cancer. But yet, the battle that's being fought right now is state by state. Bayer is trying to get through a bill that states that if the EPA says glyphosate is safe, then we shouldn't have to pay damages out. And so they're looking for that same 1986 vaccine immunity, but for glyphosate. And so to me, glyphosate has to be a number one priority of this administration. There's been a lot of attention put on preservatives in food and red dye. But here's the thing. We can choose as Maha moms to not feed our children those foods. But glyphosate enters our water systems. Glyphosate sprayed on one field can go onto the crops of another field that are organic. I mean, glyphosate comes into our food systems in ways that are very, very hard to prevent, even if you're actively trying to avoid glyphosate poisoning. It impacts our farmers as well. And it's a really ghastly injury. And red dye 40 and sodas and things, I think those are, in my opinion, secondary priorities, but they're almost easier to go after because we understand the mechanisms by which to do so, such as with SNAP, regulating the use of SNAP for purchasing of soda. I mean, there's something very reasonable about that and easy to do and enact. But glyphosate management is actually a much harder battle because you have so many entrenched systems in place. So banning it is very, very challenging, and the EPA is somehow still protecting its use.
That's wild. Well, I really appreciate your explanation of the brick walls in front of HHS and the priorities of Maha moms, because I don't want to be impatient, obviously. I want to continue to have faith in the things that garnered my vote as a Maha mom, but you can see it gets frustrating, right, to watch the politics play out. So it's wonderful to have someone like you who can continue to speak about what's harming us and our families.
Look, I am frustrated too. I wish that, the majority of Trump's executive orders have been around the Maha agenda. There are powers that he has under executive authority to move these issues through faster. And I think that the onus is really on Bobby, HHS, and our movement to push Trump towards those decisions.
So what do we do you think?
Keep speaking up. He listens. He hears us. Every opportunity there is to catch the ear of him and Susie Wiles, do so. Tweet at Susie Wiles, tweet at cabinet members, tweet at Brooke Rollins at the USDA. They see and hear all these things. Like, tweet at Stephen Miller. He has a huge amount of authority in the administration. And so don't give up. We're close. We just got a new head of the FDA today. We just got a new head of NIH today. And all of these cabinet positions are critical to getting things done, because it's not just, Bobby alone can't do it. It has to be the other members of the cabinet as well. And then getting through to their entire agencies. I mean, these are agencies full of individuals, and they are looking at and reading what we are putting out there on social media. So, this is something we cannot lose faith. We have to keep pushing. A lot can get done in the next 4 years.
Now, one more question. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. Because of this long wish list and maybe impatience that moms tend to have when I see HHS focused on, for instance, Colombian anti-Semitism and protests. The list of things that Secretary Kennedy put out last week included that he wanted to investigate why Jewish enrollment is down at universities and review Middle Eastern studies inside these universities. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? Like, what's that about? And so that kind of contributes. I think that makes me further impatient because I had these list of things that I know are true, such as fluoride and glyphosate and things like that. And then I see this focus. And I know that I'm not alone in this kind of questioning of what is this? And I know that you don't speak for him, and I know you're not speaking for HHS, but what is your response to that? To this, what is your response to my response, I suppose?
Yeah, it's my initial response to that tweet was very similar to yours and others. It was like, what is this about?
Yeah.
And is this a function of health and human services? I could see the argument under human services to attempt to combat radicalization and racism and disturbances on our campus, which is very real. Like, the universities have been infiltrated by anti-Western ideology, anti-American ideology. Oftentimes it does get tied into anti-Semitism, which, has been for reasons that, require a great deal of analysis, but and is not the topic of our interview today, but there is something there to be said. It is a big issue. We are stuck, especially as Christians, between various other ideologies that are really vying for America's attention and America's prioritization. And I think many of us just want to be done with that battle and just focus on America and American values and our families. And we want to just be like, okay, can you guys just stop arguing over there in the Middle East? And can we just focus on our own country right now? And I am in that camp. I am very much in that, let's put America first and American families first. And can we just please, move past this and keep all of those other outside ideologies outside of our universities and outside of our priorities of our government agencies. And I want to get there, and I want to chart how to get there. I have some ideas, but again, I'm not within the administration. I am out here as a Maha mom. But it's happening, and we can't avoid it. It has permeated every aspect of our lives here in America. The fact that there is this battle being waged more broadly, and these are very big, old biblical ideologies that are being waged right now on our soil.
Yeah. Okay. So I think my takeaway from that is we keep the fight. Let's keep our focus on where we have our priorities. And, we can make a difference in our MAHA goals. And if we collectively are like, what's that about? We wanted this, then maybe we get our focus on this. So thank you very much for responding to that question. You can follow Nicole Shanahan on X, and she has plenty to say. She has her own platform, a large platform, where she, again, highlights these priorities that are important to all of us. So thank you again for your time. I really appreciate meeting you, and I hope we get to speak again.
Likewise, it was a real pleasure to be on Redacted. Thanks for having me.